International Film Festival. My name's Ian Hoy, I'm one of the programmers. You've seen neither wolf nor dog, I hope, and you've made a very, very good choice. I congratulate you on your good taste. You're also lucky enough that there will be a Q&A immediately following the film. I know, particularly for these early evening screenings, some people have to rush off to another screening or elsewhere, so we understand one or two you go, but hopefully a lot of you will stick around. There's an awful lot to be spoken about this film, as you can imagine, and we have some top guests here with us, and to introduce the film and talk a little bit just before it kicks off, we have writer-director Stephen Lewis Simpson.
Thank you very much. And thank you for such an amazing turnout. I have the great honor of introducing Christopher Sweeney, who plays Kent Nerburn in the film. And I'm looking forward to talking a lot about the experience we had together because it was an amazing journey. It took a few years to make this film, and it was deeply personal for everyone involved. There's a lot of stories behind the film that I'll talk about afterwards that go way beyond the usual production. And you know, I think you'll enjoy a lot of them, so really stick around if you can. It'll be well worth it. And thank you very much.
See you after the film. I'd love to hear your questions on it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to welcome our writer-director, Stephen Lewis Simpson, back again.
Thank you very much.
And Christopher Sweeney. He's built up quite well. Okay, yeah, we'll let you settle in a minute. I know some of you say have other screens to go to. Thanks a lot for so many turning out tonight, and it's great to see such a good audience and such a good film. I'll start chatting. I've been chatting away to Stephen, luckily enough, while you're watching the film. The amount of stories this man's got is quite fascinating. But you know, you don't want me to hear me going over these old things. So like what I'll do is I'll start chatting with him, and then we'll open up to you, and I would hope we'll see some hands even. Okay, Stephen, so it's adapted from a novel, which I don't know how many people here may or may not have read. Can you tell us a bit about the process of, you know, the origination of the novel or whatever, like sort of coming to the screen, your involvement with it?
Well, the novel came out about '95 and quickly gained the reputation of, you know, within both native communities and beyond, about bridging the gap between the two communities and having this, you know, real depth to it that, you know, wasn't around in a lot of other works. And essentially the author used the story to distill down a huge amount of information that he'd had from his own real Dan. And for example, the amulet in the film is the real one that Dan gave him. And although the structure of the narrative he created to utilize all of those conversations and speeches, but Grover and Jumbo and all, they're all composites or elements of real people. And then for about 20 years, you know, people in Hollywood kept trying to get it made, some well-established people, a lot of false promises, and then Kent bumped into me at a theater in Rushville, Nebraska, where I was shooting another feature that I shot on the reservation, and he saw the authenticity in the film, but he also knew that, you know, clearly this was somebody crazy enough to get a film done by any means necessary, so he approached me with the book.
Okay, and he was involved with the writing of the screenplay as well?
Yeah, there was already a screenplay in place, and then I went through it and cut a number of scenes, and he developed this with this well-established director, and he was amazed because all the scenes that I cut were things that he felt were Hollywood false notes, and so he immediately thought, well, this is very, very promising because, you know, I clearly knew, you know, the authentic voice, so to speak, or hopefully anyway. I have one person here from Navajo country, so that's the person I'm always going to look at, and if she's nodding, I'm doing all right. So.
Okay, so since we're lucky enough to have a cast member here as well, is it the casting for the film, like, you know, bringing in officers, there's one particular notable, well, no, there's three very notable people waiting, sorry, but you know, you have a 97-year-old actor, which will bring its own challenges, but yeah, well, because you're also portraying the author of the novel.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Chris's character was the only one that I could have auditioned a huge number of people for, just in terms of, you know, there are plenty white actors in Hollywood, but there's not a lot of native roles, so particularly, you know, in their 90s. And but Chris is the only person I auditioned for the role. I saw him in a theater production, oddly enough, at the Native Voices at the Autry, a native theater program, and he was like the token white guy. And there was something about him, and a while we met and we talked, and then I auditioned him a while later, and he was the only person from then on I wanted, even though, you know, a star name might have created a different paradigm. But It's one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Would you like to? I assume Ken was watching you or saw you in the process of portraying him as well. I wonder if that caused any conflict.
He was very supportive, really.
He was, surprisingly. Yeah, I had a chance to spend quite a bit of time out on Pine Ridge with Kent. Not to mention, prior to going out, Stephen and I drove out together, actually.
He drove, I was in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
1,200 miles. He's a trooper.
But prior to shooting, Kent and I had 3 or 4 conversations on the phone, that very long-winded conversations, and we were trying to get to know each other and figure each other out, see if it was a good fit. Steve had said that when he saw what would be the equivalent of a screen test that he had done with me and Zahn McClarnon, who's the gentleman that's playing the drunk Indian in the coffee shop. It was a very intense experience because Zahn is an extremely stoic individual, and I think he wanted to basically, test my waters, see if I had it, and he certainly didn't want some bullshitter to get a role just because, I don't know, maybe he had a good reputation in the business, whatever. But time went by, and about 8 months went by, actually. I hadn't heard from Stephen. I didn't know where he was. I thought, hey, I do this all the time. Audition, don't hear back, you just have to move on. And got a phone call from Stephen, and he said, can we meet for coffee? I said, sure, great to hear from you. How are things going? Have you shot the film? And he said, how soon could you go to Pine Ridge? And I said I could pack a bag right now and go. It didn't happen that way, but I'll let him tell how that all happened. But soon thereafter, we were on the road heading out. I hope that answers your question.
Certainly does, yeah. Would you like to add into that?
He's a good driver.
Well,
and as we were heading out of town, about an hour out there, it was the first time. We were driving the right truck out there, and that was the first time it broke down. And
which I now drive as my vehicle.
Yeah, he now owns it. And he turns out he's also an incredible mechanic, which was great because the 1973 Buick kept breaking down on us in very dramatic fashion sometimes, including me careering down the road once with it with no brakes or power steering because the engine wasn't running, going faster and faster, and in this windy country road. It was actually more dramatic than anything in the film. But
okay, right. Any questions from the audience here? I think we'll start straight down there. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing what you've done. It's really important piece of work. I guess the question is, what way has exposure to the value system of the Lakota people or the Indigenous community, how's that affected your work, your thinking, your life?
How does Stephen's exposure to the values of the people, the Lakota people, affected his work?
Well,
you've got quite a history, haven't you?
Yeah, I come at it a bit differently. I first went out there in '99, and this is the 3rd feature I've done there, and I've done a 13-part TV show. For me, it's more about friendship. I have so many amazing friends that mean the world to me, and I have more fun there than anywhere else. It's an incredibly powerful and special place for me. In terms for all the rest, I mean, to me, that's, I'm not a big fan of the sort of cultural tourism that takes place within Indian country in a way. People don't give them their hearts as much, but want to kind of, I mean, especially in LA, people are like, take me to Sweat Lodge, and you're like, what, But, I mean, for us, it was more about being a vehicle for Dan's character and ultimately Dave, and Wounded Knee is central to this whole thing. It's central to when I first went out, following a ghost shirt from the Kelvin Grove Museum. But I'll put it in a little bit of perspective. Chris here is a decorated combat veteran. Dave Bald Eagle was at D-Day in Anzio. Richard, the 3rd lead, was never in the service, and yet spent more days under fire than the other 2. And that was at Wounded Knee, South Dakota, where we filmed our climax, because he was there in 1973 during the 71-day occupation there, where the U.S. government's 1,500 troops surrounding them fired about 500,000 bullets in them. And that's where we filmed the climax of the movie. And Dave, his line of Lakota had relatives there, and at the Little Bighorn as well, which that Wounded Knee was in retaliation of. So it's, for me, it's the power of that more principally than anything else. And the force of when we filmed the climax at Wounded Knee with Dave, we threw away the script. And it's not a wise thing to do normally with the climax of your movie, but basically, Kent and I could never write what Dave could say. And also it had to be very, very emotional, and at that age with dialogue and things, he just had to go to a particular place, and it's the most...
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of acting going on there. I'd spent so much time with Dave up to that point, almost as his handler. We had a few health scares with him, where he had to take a couple-day respite up in Cheyenne River, go back home, just to get rested up to finish the film. And so by that time, Dave had told me so many very personal stories, very explicitly, and my emotional availability was ticked off by probably day one. He would sit there in evenings. We were at the O'Brien Ranch, and he would sit there in his chair and just rattle away at things that had happened in his life. He was very, very forthcoming, and I tried telling the story of the Wounded Knee, the culmination of everything, when I would go home, and I would just be weeping every single time I told it. It was almost as though I was a little traumatized from it, in a good way, the kind of trauma that I needed. So in that regard, I was very parallel to what Kent himself had experienced. But yeah, being at a place like Wounded Knee, I myself was born on the Acoma Indian Reservation in central Washington State, but I had very little contact with the natives growing up. Occasionally we played some sports teams, that type of thing, but didn't really have my head, sunken into their world. So to have, after 40 some odd years later, to be approached to play the role in such an important place in the United States, in the world for that part, was an overwhelming. So yeah, it was just very, it was just very, it was very touching.
And one of the key things about scenes like that is the film was made, I had a crew of 2, which anyone of you that make films here know that's ridiculous, and there was no one in pre-production or post-production the whole way through. But that lends itself to a lot of great advantages, and when we filmed that scene, it was the sound guy, me, and Chris and Dave, and it allows a directness and intimacy and a lot of other things that you just cannot create on your average set. But it led, and we shot incredibly fast, 18 days, but short days in real terms because of Dave's age. And certain scenes, a lot of it were shot in single takes. That's what we had, going into Wounded Knee, single take, walk in, single take. The scene with the girl talking over the overturned boat, that all 4.5 minutes single take. And
the final scene you were saying earlier, that was like you tried some stuff, and basically you ended up just sort of letting Dave just sort of walk and talk, and that's where sort of shoot.
He just had to hit this emotional reality, and he really did. He really did. Yeah. And it had to be done that way. It had to be bold. I mean, if Hollywood had made this film, they'd have gone to a number of established younger Native actors, figured out how to age them, but they would never, ever have been able to recreate that feeling. There's a term, I used to hear a fair bit of the elders who were brought up by people born free, as such, before the reservation system and that sort of thing, and they carry themselves in a different way. There's a different energy. And, a friend of mine was Russell Means, for example, who he passed away about 74, but, he was someone old enough and an experienced actor, but he felt contemporary and could never have got into that space at all. And so if Dave wasn't available or had passed or whatever before we were ready to shoot, I would have walked away from the film, even though I'd put about 3 years into it at that point.
It was really as final as that?
Yeah,
Dave
no one else. It would have been ridiculous. And I see every time I look at the film, and that goes for Chris, and it also goes for Richard. And there was a bond that you just can't really describe. I mean, it was just such an emotional investment. It was incredibly special.
Okay, I have a question.
Had too many massacres in the United States. When will the film be shown?
Good question. I mean, for us, it's finding a strong festival there to format that can get us some attention would be a wonderful way to do it. In reality, we'll probably come up with a hybrid distribution model because most independent films just get distributed in a handful of the big cities, and that's not where most of our audience is. So we have to be much more imaginative than that. And I have a huge list of venues being suggested by people. I mean, the audience funded the film. It was through Kickstarter. I mean, the fans are so passionate about it. So we're going to do it sort of hopefully in a more grassroots level and actually ultimately get seen by a lot more people because the independent film model in the States is very, very poor.
I want to express my deep appreciation. I'm a United States citizen and I read the book about 15 years ago. And I think the timing of your opening this film is just amazing.
Thank you.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
Thank you.
Is there a question there? Yeah.
Thank you for a film that I found to be beautifully shot and beautifully acted. It was tremendous.
Thank you.
But could you just explain the meaning of the title for me?
Yeah, I mean, it was a Sitting Bull saying, basically a reservation Indian is, neither Indian nor white, neither wolf nor dog. It's sort of this in-between state. Yeah. And actually, can I have I know there's one or two people came in from quite far afield, but can anyone put their hands up that sort of traveled, out with the sort of general city limits to be here? I know, yeah, you guys from, where did you come in from?
Just 10 miles.
Oh, that's not nice. Well, I know we got Manchester over here. Was it? All right, that's close enough. Anyone else? Yeah, Oxford. Brian?
Wow. Dundee.
Dundee, good. Right, well, thank you very much. Oh, yeah, and
Navajo Nation, United States.
representing. Yeah.
Any other questions here? Don't be shy. Yeah, I can see two, so start with you there. Yeah.
Well, two, I'm sorry to cheat.
Just be quick.
How is Dave doing now, and have you got UK distribution?
Second question first, no. Dave's had, but I mean, at that age, he's sort of in and out of having, one thing or another to take care of. He had a little bit of a sticky period recently, but, it sounds like he's somewhat on the mend, but he's a different kind of human being, really. Anyone undertaking any kind of role at that age, but one with such intensity and long dialogue scenes, it was humbling.
And, would you like to mention that Dave's wife was in the film?
Oh, yeah. So anyway, we're filming away, and I have this scene in the border town. It's 3rd days of filming in the museum, and I'm going, where am I going to get some, elder white lady for the scene? And I tried a theater group, and it wasn't getting any success. And then we're just sitting at dinner one of these days, and I'm just looking over at Dave's wife, who was a Belgian actress in her earlier years. And I'm just looking at her going, Josie, how do you, and I don't think she'd acted in years, but it was, and so the wife, and the woman in the museum is Dave's wife. Actually, like a lot of elder Lakota men that I know, he has a much younger European wife. There's a little bit of a thing going. Are the Navajo the same, or is that just Lakota men? No, I know a lot. Trust me, I know a lot up there that are like, they got some 45-year-old, Dutch wife kicking around, and they're like, I mean, it's a phenomenon. I think it's the hair,
Okay, there was another question straight.
Did Dave actually make the first move, or was that just in your story? Did you actually go to him and ask him to be the actor?
Oh, I went to him. I mean, I was aware of him probably halfway through the process. And, I flew out there to meet him, and I just knew that, regardless of any of the sort of hurdles, and, memory at 95 is, is something, so you have to film in a very particular way. And, I mean, this is the thing, Chris was incredible because they built such an amazing relationship. But it's also things like that long scene where they meet for the first time is about 5.5, 6 minutes long. And we filmed for probably about 3 hours on Dave, and then we turn the camera around and everything you see in the film on Chris is one single take. And his ability to nail that scene that way is a big part of allowing us to go through the process that way. I mean, there were so many things that fell into place that way. It was very, very lucky. Would you?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm blowing his trumpet. He can't respond to that, but anyway, what else?
okay. No, it was a unique experience as an actor. It was full immersion guerrilla filmmaking, and I think it aided the whole process. For some reason, I was quite sick the entire shoot, and was for 2 months after when I got home. As usual, I didn't go to a doctor. I just stuck it out. But what's the question? Yeah, the whole experience. Like I said, I'd never done anything like that as an actor. It was, you get a script, you learn it, you show up on set.
Do you feel extra pressure? Because I was kind of chatting to Stephen about this. When you represent such a serious subject, such a sacred, yeah, that's a good one, and like the historical aspects, the people that potentially could be deeply offended and hurt by. Did you feel pressure? I know Stephen's done a lot of work. Did you feel at ease, like you have a confidence that you were going to do this justice, or was there an element, and perhaps even the sort of people that would see you filming, were they ever like suspicious, like what are these guys up to? Like that line about if I had a nickel for every white guy that turns up here to write a book and stuff. I think it sort of portrays beautifully that people coming into.
Yeah, I did it obviously when we were driving out. I was sick to my stomach over the thought of it. I don't know if I had told Stephen that. I mean, we discussed a lot. It's a 1,200-mile drive. So we got a lot of that out, but it didn't really sate my need for reassurance. And it wasn't until I got on to the reservation. And we did how many days? We did a good week of location scouting. Stephen had gone out quite a bit earlier to do most of it, but he and I went around the reservation, and I had such apprehensions. I was very nervous. I knew that Pine Ridge was the poorest place in the United States, or if you want to call it a county or a region, and I was concerned. I was concerned that I would come off as someone that had his own opinions about things, so I was very cautious at the beginning. But once I met Dave and I'd met a few of his friends, young people, they took us out to some of the locations. I soon realized that I had been preparing for the experience for my entire adult life, from the time I was in the Marine Corps to traveling all over the world and operating amongst people from the third world. I just realized that I had developed a deep empathy and sensitivity towards marginalized people. So once that initial concern faded, I met Dave, and he basically, we fell in love with each other. I mean, the guy was just, I mean, that scene at Wounded Knee, it wasn't on camera, but he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we were both weeping, and I said to him, I just want you to know that you're my friend, and that we're done shooting here, but you will always hold a special place in my heart. So he looks at me and he says, you were a great friend to me. And it meant so much. And now, having seen the film, I mean, it resonated with me. I screened it, done some, looked at it and tried to, help Stephen with certain things about continuity and that type of thing. And we didn't shoot enough footage to really be able to do that. But I want to thank Stephen, because to give not only an actor, but a human being an opportunity to work in close proximity and to gain trust, because I believe that I did. Everyone that I ran across, somehow there was a sense of prepossession that I had when I would go around the reservation. I was told by a few of the Lakota, the reason we like you is because you're not careful. You are who you are, unapologetically, and that meant a lot to me. But I'm going on, but the thing I would really like...
It's great stuff.
I would like to thank Stephen, because 2 months ago, my father, 80 years old, passed away, and he'd been suffering with congestive heart failure for a good part of 10, 12 years in and out of hospice. So that happening, and then being able to come here and watch Dave, who in so many ways kind of reminds me of my father in his last 2 or 3 years, the drooping head and just the lack of focus sometimes. It was almost like Dave was acting as a conduit in the film as I just watched it for the relationship I had with my father. And I do remember saying to Dave one evening, we were alone in the Buick. I was keeping him warm, had the heater going, and people, Rick and Stephen were setting up lights and preparing for a particular scene. And I remember we sat there in quiet for a while, and then we just talked like contemporaries. And it was almost as though he just snapped to. And that being said, when I spoke with my father, who was suffering from severe dementia in the last few weeks of his sickness, my father, I was told that he wouldn't understand me when I spoke to him on the telephones, but I called anyways to the hospice, and my stepmother said, you're not gonna understand what he's saying, Chris. And I said, well, put him on anyways. I just be able to tell him that I love him. And he got on the phone. She said, Gene, would you like to talk to your son, Chris, your youngest son, because he needed a reminder. And he snapped to such an acute level of cognitive power that it was almost as like he was fine. And he said to me the most powerful thing that reminds me of things that Dave had said to me. He said, I want you to know that you're a great man. And then he started to talk gibberish. And my stepmother picked up the phone. She said, all right, Gene. And she says, this is the time where he starts to make up his own words. And I said to her, isn't that what us Sweeney boys do? We like to make up words, and eventually they sink into the vernacular. So, thank you, Stephen. I didn't even talk to you about this since we've been here, but it is an incredibly, profoundly parallel experience. And my wife Sarah's right here, and I love her dearly. And so glad you could be here with me.
Okay, I know we're out of time, but I just want to also, while we're thanking people, we have one of our principal supporters from Kickstarter here, Carl, and I can't tell you how big your support was. Enormously. And please post online about the film. Go to Neither Wolf Nor Dog Movie on Facebook and IMDb to vote and review and whatever, because we need to get the word out. That's how these things work. If you all go home and nobody knows, nobody knows. So, please, if the movie meant something to you and you want to bring it out to the world, please help be a little foot soldier getting the word out there, and that would be amazingly appreciated.
Okay, well, we've got to vacate the screen for another screen, but thanks so much for sticking around. I think we'll really worth it. Thanks to you guys, and just for a couple of days of the best, also to catch some other stuff and enjoy it.